Alright, so today's episode is gonna be a bit different. I often get asked what things people should buy for making Korean food, the essentials. So, guess what we're gonna talk about today? The essentials. Now, we're not gonna be covering every conceivable Korean ingredient out there, just the ones you need to make, say, 90% of Korean food. And some of these will be more like an honorable mention rather than a must-have. Even though these are Korean ingredients, well, for the most part, they can still be used in a wide range of dishes from around the world. By the end of the episode, you'll be an expert on essential sauces, pastes, rice, and noodles. And while you're at it, consider subscribing. I release new episodes on modern Korean food every Tuesday and Thursday. So, without a doubt, the single most important ingredient in all of Korean cooking is gochugaru, Korean chili flakes. With all of my recipes, I try to give substitutions for ingredients, but there is no substitution for gochugaru. It has a very pronounced flavor, but doesn't pack a ton of heat. It's also the ingredient that gives Korea's most iconic dish, kimchi, its signature color and taste. So if you're going to get anything mentioned in this video, make it this. Which brings us to probably the most recognizable Korean ingredient, gochujang, hot pepper paste. It's gochugaru that's been mixed with glutinous rice, malt, and water, then left to ferment for 4 to 6 months in the hot sun. The result is an incredibly flavorful and spicy paste. Unlike gochugaru, which is mostly only obtainable in Asian grocers, gochujang can be found in most grocery stores in North America. It's become a very popular ingredient over the last few years. After gochugaru and gochujang, the second most important ingredient in Korean, and most important in all Asian food for that matter, is soy sauce. Now, purists will argue to buy Korean soy sauce, and they're probably right. But to be honest, with the amount of soy sauce I go through, I just buy a pretty generic one in a large jug. This is my all-purpose soy sauce, and will work in basically every recipe. But in addition to having a good all-purpose soy sauce, I also have a dark soy sauce and a light soy sauce. Now, this can get a little confusing, so bear with me for a moment. Most people think dark soy sauce is just very concentrated and super salty, but it's actually very sweet and has a much milder flavor. It's more used for adding a rich dark color than flavor, while light soy sauce is much saltier than an all-purpose, but much lighter in color. It's used mostly in making sauces or pickles. Now, the third most important ingredient in Korean cooking is anchovy sauce. Like gochugaru and soy sauce, this is used in most of Korean cooking. If you've ever had Thai fish sauce, you get the idea of what it is. The main difference is Korean anchovy sauce is going to have a very robust flavor compared to Thai, and is a bit saltier as well. You can also see how it's a bit darker in color too. Since there's a ton of pickles in Korean cuisine, rice vinegar is a must. You can substitute white vinegar for rice, but it'll never be the same. Rice vinegar has a slight floral note, and it is a bit sweeter, but never overpowers whatever you're pickling. Koreans love their sesame oil, and while in most dishes from China and Japan will call for a drop here or there, Koreans will usually add tablespoons to a dish. If you're lucky enough to get your hands on some high-quality Korean sesame oil, you'll notice how smoky and nutty it is compared to a Chinese one like this. Now, because Korea and Japan are neighboring countries, you'll notice a lot of overlap in ingredients and styles. So Japanese mirin is an ingredient used as much in Korean cooking as Japanese. Mirin is similar to sake in that it's also a type of rice wine, but the main difference is the smaller alcohol content and its much sweeter taste. Now, as far as sake or a cooking rice wine, they're definitely used a lot in Korean food and can easily elevate a dish, so I'd say grab a bottle if you can, but they're not necessary. Another must-have for Korean cooking is doenjang, or fermented soybean paste. It's very similar to Japanese miso, which will be much easier to get your hands on at the average grocer, but the process in which they're made is much different. Japanese miso will take years to ferment and have a very mild flavor, whereas doenjang takes about a year and is very strong in flavor, and a bit saltier than miso. Since a lot of Korean ingredients are either sour, funky, or spicy, Koreans rely heavily on sweetness to balance it all out. And aside from sugar, the most common way to add sweetness to a Korean dish is rice syrup. It's like a cross between honey and corn syrup, so it has a nice flavor, but isn't super sweet. As for rice, you'll find most Koreans go for short grain, as it's a bit stickier than long grain, and because of its higher sugar content, it gets a lot crispier in dishes like kimchi fried rice or bibimbap. Personally, I like using jasmine rice, as it's almost like a hybrid of the two. Now, this is sort of an honorable mention, but there probably isn't a Korean home that doesn't have at least some version of an instant ramen kicking around, Shin Ramyun being the gold standard. While Koreans don't go to the extremes that Japanese do over ramen, Koreans are nonetheless obsessed with instant ramen. The seasoning packets also make a killer barbecue rub for brisket, which you can check out here. While we're on the topic of noodles, there are lots of different kinds used in Korean cooking, but the two that I always have on hand is glass noodles and soba noodles. Glass noodles especially are a very iconic Korean ingredient. You'll also find udon noodles in a lot of dishes, but those I prefer to make my own. You can check out the video at the top for the recipe. Dashi stock is the basis for a multitude of Japanese food, which is just kombu, a type of sea kelp, and bonito flakes, a type of dried tuna. In Korea, this stock is called yuksu, and is made using dried anchovies instead of bonito. Dried anchovies are also used in stir-fry dishes and are even candied as a late-night bar snack. You won't find tons of flour being used in Korean food. More often than not, you'll see cornstarch or potato starch instead. They're both pretty cheap ingredients and are used to thicken jjigaes or stews, and to make things crispy when fried, like as in Korean fried chicken. Potato starch is best, but cornstarch is more readily available. Now, this last one is another honorable mention, and is really mostly only used in one dish. But that dish is so iconic, I feel it needed to be mentioned. Jjajangmyeon, or black bean noodles, is made using a fermented bean paste. It has a very unique flavor and is a little salty. It's not something you need to have on hand, but once you start making jjajangmyeon, you'll go through tons of it. And that's it, Korean Pantry Essentials. I hope this video helps you out on your next shopping trip and that you have a better understanding of some of the fundamental Korean ingredients. If you'd like to see a part 2, leave a comment down below. Thanks for watching. Consider subscribing so you never miss out on a new episode every Tuesday and Thursday. You can also follow me on Facebook, Instagram, and Reddit for more content.